Hello, all, and welcome back to a new episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we are going to be reviewing the film I'm Still Here. So, Sarah, kick us off with an IMDb summary for I'm Still Here.
A mother is forced to reinvent herself when her family's life is shattered by an act of arbitrary violence during the tightening grip of a military dictatorship in Brazil, 1971.
All right. So in Movies and Us tradition, let's start off with our one-sentence summaries. For I'm Still Here, Sarah, what is yours?
Mine is, dictatorships are bad.
Yeah. Short, sweet, and to the point. Agreed. My one-sentence summary is, the Paiva story is still here.
Aw, that's so sweet. Yes, it is still here. Wow.
Yes. This film has done such a great job bringing it to life based on her memoir. So, yeah. All right. Well, let's share our high-level thoughts about I'm Still Here before we dive into spoiler territory. So, Sarah, I'm curious how this film landed with you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a really powerful film, watching this woman have to endure everything that she did while also trying to make sure that her family is okay and, just trudging through this impossible situation. And I feel like the film does a really good job of capturing all of that. And I'm really impressed by all of the powers that be, all of the critics, the Academy, for even putting this on our radar, because I had never heard of it until it was, nominated for the Oscars. It was nominated, in other critical bodies as well. And so I think this is one of those really great examples of the Academy using its powers for good and elevating this film that otherwise might not have gotten a lot of attention. So I'm really, good job, the Academy. We're proud of you. Thank you for introducing this film to a wider audience. So yeah, all in all, I think it's a really powerful film. I have some nits to pick with it, but on the whole, I think it's really effective, and it tells this really important story very well.
Yeah, a rare moment when we're praising the Academy. No, but I think it's a really great point. I was thinking about that a lot throughout watching this movie, is how many more people will experience this story because it has gotten the attention and the critical acclaim. It was not on my radar at all either. And I think it's also indicative of how much the Academy, their voting body, is becoming far more international. And it's really good for us here in the US to watch and experience art and stories from other countries, and not only stories set in the United States, and to expand our understanding, expand our engagement with other stories beyond our own. I think there's so much good that is coming from this, and the way that people are going to go and see this film because it's gotten not just a Best International Feature nomination, but a Best Picture nomination. And that is huge for this film. So I think that is all so important and significant. And yeah, I think overall, this film is very effective. It's incredibly moving. I think that one of the big things that I've been on a recent kick on is just really celebrating films that show restraint and not leaning into melodrama. And this is a film that does an incredible job of that. In a lot of ways, I was, after this film, thinking about how this film almost shows all of the in-between moments. Those moments that are, just us waiting with this family, waiting for news, waiting in our cell with the mother, waiting for, new updates. There's so much waiting, and there's so much managing logistics of the home while waiting. And I think that is an incredibly powerful part of what makes this film effective, is that we don't get a ton of the big emotional moments of this family grieving together and processing together. It's a lot of them living life with the fact of the disappeared father looming over them day in and day out. And I think that's what makes this film really effective. So I really celebrate this film for that. I feel like we've gotten some recent films that have done an incredible job of showing that restraint and using that tactic very effectively. And I'm Still Here is definitely one of them.
And I think that that just helps really emphasize this story too, because the the mother, Eunice, she has to try and keep her family together in this really difficult circumstance, and like kids still have to go to school and meals still have to be made and all of these little everyday trivial things that have to be done while your world is falling apart around you. And I think that the way that this is filmed and kind of leaning away from sensationalism helps emphasize the reality that she's having to go through. And it's like, yeah, the rug has been pulled out from under her. Everything is different. She doesn't know what to do, but she knows these kids need to get fed and dressed and go to school. And so that's the next right thing that she has to do. And there's almost like a pragmatism and like a straightforwardness to this film that I think really makes it feel like you're immersed in her world while she's going through this really just tragic, horrifying circumstance.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about as the film was unfolding before me how much this feels almost like documentary style or home video style. Like we spend so much of this film just in this home together with this family. And obviously at the beginning of the film we experience all of the joyful moments of them together, but especially in that middle section, a lot of what we see is them living out like day to day little moments. And so it feels like someone's kind of just in their orbit with a camera as little life moments are happening. They're going to school, they're going off to college, they're trying to figure out like who's covering the meals, like you mentioned, getting fed. Like there's a lot of just waking up in the morning and with this family and them running to each other's rooms and being there for each other or going to bed together. So there's just I love the traditional narrative structure of this film and the non-traditional narrative approach. There's a lot of like little vignettes of little life moments that are strung and edited together, and we feel the passage of time, but there is no like central storyline and a build up with a main struggle that then gets resolved along the way. Like this feels like some family's home videos strung and edited together through the best of times and the worst of times and all of the little moments in between. And that was noteworthy to me because it's so different from so much of the way we tell stories typically in Hollywood films.
And that just helps make it all the more intimate too, because you feel like you're either in the middle of somebody's family video or you're watching somebody's family video, that's just not something that people tend to put out there for the world to see. So it feels so intimate and close because you're watching these little snippets of somebody's life rather than, like you said, this like mass produced, very typical 3-act structure. Like, no, we are just wading through with this woman and her family as they are just trying to survive. And it's absolutely harrowing to watch what they have to do in order to make it.
Yeah, totally. The concept of scenes feels fluid in this film. The way that a scene is constructed with beats and high points and low points and kind of the mini arcs of a scene making up the makeup of a entire film of that narrative arc. Like this film, like so easily and fluidly eases from moment to moment without the need to resolve a prior moment before we go to the next one. And like you mentioned, it adds so much intimacy to the story. I mean, I felt like I was like a part of this family. I was like one of the other sisters that was processing through and just like living life with them. And that feeling of invitation into their home, into their moments felt so open. That invitation felt really open of like, come and do life with us because we are experiencing so much right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's so effective in the storytelling, and I think there's also something to be said about how Vera is constantly filming on her little camera, and then there are these cut-ins of her footage too, that I think helps really set the stage for this feeling of, "Come on in, be part of the family." And especially in the beginning of the film, you see them out in their community. The film opens, they're all on the beach together having fun and playing, and you don't know who is part of this family and just who is a neighbor, and you see, like, people just constantly going in and out of the house, so it feels like we are just another person in this community who is experiencing this with them, and so I think it was so smart of the film to start out with those concepts that really create that sense of closeness that is needed for us to go on this journey with this family.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point, which is that the opening is so vital to the rest of this film working. I mean, that is the emotional core. And I love how much the film chooses to spend enough time with this family before everything happens. I think had they cut that shorter and had the disappearance of the father happen like 10, 15 minutes earlier in the runtime of the film, we wouldn't have the fullness of the weight of his disappearance to really experience together with this family. So you're so right. That opening section is vital to the rest of the emotional core of this film working, but also to fully understand the stakes here and what this means for this family when their literal like center of gravity and like a vital presence in their life is gone, and the void of the father is so felt throughout the film, and it all rests on us getting so invested and bought into this family from that opening sequence.
Mhm. Yeah, it's more than just this cognitive understanding of like, "Oh, no, a member of the family has been disappeared." You're right, it is this feeling. You feel the void, and those beginning scenes especially help show the ways that he is almost like a center of gravity for this family. And everybody has their own lives and they're doing their own thing and they all have their own interests. But there is something about the father, Rubens, that they just come to. He draws them to him. Not in like a like creepy malicious way, but just that's how their family works. And you can see just that closeness. So then when he's removed, because we've spent so much time with this family together and whole, we viscerally feel that absence as opposed to just this cognitive understanding of like, oh, he was there and now he's gone.
Yeah, yeah, which I feel like the cognitive would be effective, but not as deeply moving as this is. You're right. So the way that the film captures our hearts from the beginning for him, we in a lot of ways are also like drawn into his orbit and the charisma and the pillar that he is for this family. We feel the weight of that. I also just love that in that opening section, maybe like act one of this film, we see them as a collective, like their family and all their friends, and they're at the beach and they're at the party. And so we see them as a group, and obviously it is beautiful and joyous and they're thriving. They're so full of life. But I also love how we get to see little moments between the father and each of the children and kind of the personal relationship that he has with each of them and how it shows up differently or he interacts with them differently. And also those smaller little moments between him and the mother too. So the film is very efficient at showing us, obviously, this group is full and abundant in their love together, but also that there are deep personal ties and connection and rapport that he has with all of them individually. And so we can also understand when we see moments throughout the rest of the film when each of the individual children and family members are mourning him, what that means for their personal relationship with him. So just kind of like strategically, the kind of like horizontal view of like the whole collective, but also the vertical view of like the depth that he has with each of them is all communicated so efficiently in like a short period of time. But I think that is necessary too, is showing the individual relationships and those tender moments that he has with each of the children.
You're right. It is so efficient the way that they set all of this up. And it's necessary too. Like it's it's doing so much in such a short period of time, and like we said, it sets the tone for the entire rest of the film because you need to see and experience, not just see, but experience what these good times were like. And then I even love that in this good time, you're also seeing little bits of something. You know that something's going on and something's not right. And obviously later in the film that it all comes to a head. But I love how much they were able to do in that short period of time to really set us up emotionally and mentally for what we are going to go through for the rest of the film.
Yeah, that's a really great point because one of the ones that was really jarring is when they're at the beach, which that photograph becomes iconic and like referenced back at the end of the film. But that beach moment, which is so idyllic, like who doesn't love a family beach day? You know what I mean? Like sun is shining, they're playing in the sand, it's summertime, they're all together. And then right before or after they're taking the family photo, you see the tanks roll through town. And it almost like breaks them out of that bubble of perfect abundant harmony together and joy, and their world is kind of like like shattered for a bit, and they quickly go back to, well, okay, we must choose joy in this moment, right? Like we are still together, we have so much to be blessed by. But you do see all of their faces like drop when they see the tanks and they hear the sounds, and then they immediately resume life again. But that is that almost looming omen of what is to come that we are emotionally getting prepared for as the audience as well.
Yeah, it's the perfect like sign. Like, oh, everything is not as it seems. And there's little things that Rubens does, especially in the beginning too, where it's like, man, this is so great and so sweet. And then there will be like a look or like something that he says, or it'll just be this little something where you're like, oh, wait. Not everything is right in the world. We don't exactly know the full extent of what is wrong, but we know that something is amiss. And then those things escalate in that kind of like first act where everything is still okay. And then everything goes off the rails. But I loved the way that those are really subtly and intentionally woven throughout so that we're prepared. We might not know what's coming and the extent of what's coming, but our spidey senses are up and wondering kind of what's going to happen next.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a really great shot when Rubens is being taken into the car when he's leaving the home, and it's a POV shot from Eunice's perspective at the door, the front door, and you just see his back walking away. And I just was thinking and wondering in that moment, like she knows that his safety is always at risk given the regime that is in power now and his past and all that kind of stuff. And so I was just wondering in that moment, like, is she also thinking to herself, is this the last time that I will see him? You know, like this. No, I think maybe some of the younger kids don't understand what's happening, but I think for her, she must have been emotionally preparing for what this moment means. You know, like she is not deluded into believing that he's just going off to work, he's going to give his testimony, and he's surefire definitely going to come back home today. Like there's a like a weightiness in that moment and that shot that I feel like is so significant, where she has a hunch that this is not going to go well. And I think that choice of camera angle feels so significant because she's almost like taking in the last moments potentially of seeing her husband from behind and kind of remembering them in her mind as well.
And I think shots like that also help us empathize with her even more. Like, I mean, obviously, we're going to empathize with this woman who walks through hell during this entire movie. But little shots like that, I feel like really help us because we're seeing what she would be seeing. And that I feel like helps drop us into her experience a little bit better because we're seeing that. So I think that's such a great use of those shots to really help us empathize with her because we're going to need to.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like we are really like walking in her footsteps. Like we are in her shoes in that moment, feeling all the things that she might be feeling as well. Maybe we'll give a spoiler alert here. So if you haven't seen I'm Still Here, it is available out in theaters. This is an important film. It's one that's definitely worth watching and experiencing. And yeah, we recommend go checking it out before listening to the rest of this conversation. Okay. What are some things that really stood out to you in this film that we might have not touched on quite yet?
One of the aspects that I really appreciate, and it kind of touches on what we were talking about earlier with all these little vignettes, is so this is based off of the book written by her son Marcelo, and I read somewhere that like he didn't see his mom cry during this whole ordeal, and the film echoes that. And there will be a lot of times where you know that she's about to cry or she has been crying, but the film doesn't focus on that because she didn't let other people see that because she had to be strong and put together. And I think especially after she learns that Rubens has died, but she can't let anybody know. And so she's harboring this terrible, terrible secret. And she can't express herself maybe the way she might normally want to. And I love that the film echoes that and cuts away in those moments, again helping us better understand who Eunice is and how she is needing to hold it all together, or she feels like she needs to hold it all together so that her family is safe and taken care of, and that her kids can have maybe some semblance of a hope at a somewhat normal childhood. And so I loved those little details to really help us better understand this experience that they were going through and what it was like for these kids to see their mom walking through this as well.
And it's so neat, like you mentioned, to see how the film honors her in that way and honors the strength of her wanting to protect against her children having to see her in that state by processing through so much of that on her own. And so like in the same way the film also reflects that fact, like we were talking about earlier, the restraint in showing and not showing all of those deeply raw emotional moments, but showing almost the in-between moments and what its life looks like in between all of those big moments of processing grief, but also life needs to happen. And this film almost focuses so much of that on that. And it's neat to see the way that that also is reflective and honoring of the way that Eunice wanted to show up for her children too. That's so cool.
Yeah, yeah, and you see, gosh, the character of Eunice is so interesting, and there's so much to her too. Like, I don't know, I was just captivated by her, and Fernanda Torres does a fantastic job in this role, just carrying all of that complexity because you see, you know, the tender love and care, you see the protector, you see this person who is passionate about justice but also just wants to make sure that her family is okay, and she is determined and she is tough, but there's also like a really soft side to her as well. Like there's so much in this one character, and I loved that as well. Like she's not just one thing, and you see her have to be many things throughout the film. And just again the complexity and the difficulty of being a person in that situation, and the film really effectively shows that, and Fernanda Torres just does a fantastic job navigating all of those different parts of who she is as a person.
Yeah, and it's incredible how much she is such a pillar of strength throughout this film, but she is willing to also be vulnerable with her children. I think that was like noteworthy to me because sometimes the picture of what being strong in these deeply emotional moments looks like is a lack of emotion. And I think that she does an incredible job balancing like we are going to get through this, but also this is hard. And she allows her children into what hard looks like, and being able to acknowledge that. So just the amount of like emotional vulnerability, and not fully, she's not letting her children into like everything, all of those like deeply, deeply raw moments, but she allows space for them to feel, and she showcases her feelings as well with them, so that it creates feelings of safety for them to process through all of this. And so I loved just how much she's showcasing what strength looks like while not being emotionally shut down either, and kind of white knuckling her way through this. Like she is a full, whole beating heart going through this together with her kids, and modeling what that looks like for them.
And trying to do it in, like, ways that are age appropriate too. I love
Yeah.
there's there's that one moment when Vera comes back and they're in the front seat and the littles are in the back seat, and Vera kept she wants to talk about what's going on. She wants to talk about the news and about, her father and like all of this that happened. And in just one look, Eunice shuts that down. She glances to the back and then she glances at Vera next to her. And that was just a whole conversation in those two looks. So I loved all of those little details because, I mean, Eunice is having to process through her own emotions and try and help her kids too, but they're all different ages and different stages of growth. And so, like, what do you tell the oldest one versus the youngest one? And that would be so hard to navigate in and of itself. So just these layers of complexity that she's having to navigate through, in addition to utter and complete heartbreak at the injustice that has happened. And man, this film captures all of that just absolutely beautifully.
Yeah, and it's something that I wouldn't have thought about as such a key area of consideration, but when you're thrown into a scenario like this, like it is so fully on display when you have such a wide age range. How do you be there appropriately for each of the different, even each of the different kids, And so, and it's neat to see the way that there's different pieces of information that she chooses to share with some of the older girls. And she specifically tells them the little ones aren't ready yet. Like, just be there for them. And knowing and having the wisdom to know at which age which child should know what is a fascinating, just like logistic detail that I think this film showcases as well. That I think when you think about having to process through something this big, there's so much to it, but that is one that is so important as well, and affects your day to day of what, who knows what, and what information is being shared with who, and how detailed is that information. It's all so specifically designed to be what's best for each kid. And I think that the wisdom in making those decisions is a big weight to carry that she does such an incredible job with throughout the course of the film.
Yeah, and also just speaks to the care that she has for each of the kids. Like she doesn't always get it right. She does make mistakes. She's not perfect, and I love that the film also highlights those moments, but that there's such intentionality, and that she has the mental and emotional space to be making those decisions while her world has just like crumbled. I just Man, she's such an incredible character, and presumably was an incredible real life person, and I'm just amazed that the film was able to communicate all of those things so well, and it's through all of those little subtle moments in these vignettes of their life that I think communicates all that she was doing to try and hold it all together.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, and her processing so much of this herself while also having to pour out and be that place of stability for the kids is unfathomable. And during some of the most formative periods of their lives. And also Vera was abroad and having to figure out and navigate, like, bringing Vera back and ensuring her safety. It's just there's so many far-reaching aspects of this scenario that I feel like the film allows us into that. Like, it's almost saying, like, remember these details too? You know what I mean? Like, there's so many that, like, as someone who does not have a family and is not a mother of like 7, 8 children, there's a lot of implications that I feel like the film did an incredible job letting us into the mind space of contemplating what would you do? How would you manage all of this? And I think the film does an amazing job of doing that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I just like, women are superheroes, but I think moms are also, like, super duper heroes, like, to try and keep, so many children all put together and keep their lives going. And I you watch movies sometimes and it's like, "Oh my gosh, that child is now, like, messed up forever." Like, that child is gonna need so much just help and love and therapy, and they're gonna have a hard time. And in this one, most of the kids, it was like they have been through hell and they're going through really difficult circumstances. But I think her intentionality and somehow a like ability to make sure that they're all somewhat shielded from this kind of helped. And I think those little vignettes at the end really help emphasize their lives have not been perfect, but they all made it through it pretty well, and they are doing well now. And so all of her sacrifice when they were younger, and everything that she did to try and insulate them from the harm and the tragedy and the grief, while also giving them a lane to express themselves and process through what they could, really, like, paid off later in their lives when they have their own families and their own lives, and they're all still able to gather together and celebrate her and one another. So I thought that that was a really interesting way to showcase all of her sacrifices pay off in the end to some degree. And they were some big sacrifices that she made.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I love about this film is how long of an arc we get to follow this family. And the film doesn't spend too much time in the later years, and rightly so. I think it spends a bulk and majority of its screen time in the time when the disappearance happens and kind of the several months afterwards. But I love that we cut to not one, but two future moments and seeing the way that the disappearance and the question marks and the wondering and the unresolved parts of this storyline has still continued to be a presence in their lives is important because it brings to life something that I think Eunice says in her press interview in the kind of like first cut forward moment where she says that forced disappearance are some of the worst things that can be done because you condemn all of the others to psychological torture. And the way that this family is unable to move forward because at any point there's still these questions and these unresolved details that can't help them process and heal and move forward is, I think, so wonderfully displayed by the way that the film showcases that even like 2 decades later, 4 decades later, those questions are still unanswered and they still affect this whole family in significant ways. And so I just appreciate that the film had the understanding to know and showcase to us as the viewers that the long-reaching consequences and impact of these unanswered questions do extend for many, many decades. Like it's not something that this family can resolve and move on and try and come to a conclusion on their own and then therefore process. Like those open questions still will haunt them. And until they are answered, it feels like the pages of this book are still being flipped to maybe the next page, And so that feeling of catharsis that I think we have when she finally receives the death certificate and put it in the book that she's been collecting all of these newspaper clippings for feels weighty and feels like this resolution to something that has been so prominent on our minds for all of these years. And I appreciate that the film gives time for showing us the all of these years aspect of the story and the situation that they're in.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And just the understanding that, like you said, these things that happened in the past, they have far-reaching consequences, you know? The 25 years later was in 1996, like, that wasn't that long ago, you know? 1971 wasn't that long ago, and so we are still dealing with the after effects that of decisions that were made, you know, decades ago, and I love that this one family's experience is just a small example of what that looks like, and the importance of, you know, not only understanding history, but taking those steps to try and heal what has been broken or fix what has been broken in the past, and those steps of something as simple as issuing a death certificate so that this family can have closure, you know, and there's big things that need to be done and little things that need to be done, but that understanding that history is important and it directly affects us today too. And I love that one of the reporters asks about, like, is this important? This happened so long ago. And she is like, no, it is. It is important. And I feel like that is part of the thesis of this film, is that stories like this are important, even though they happened decades ago. There are still ramifications of that today.
Yeah, no, that's so true. That's so true. And her being able to have that space to share, like, this is important. This is our story and we lived this out, and these small things that seem insignificant or just seem like, logistical details are like carry so much emotional weight to this family to have that feeling of resolution, that feeling of closure, and then they can begin to move forward. But until then, like, even though the thing is, like, I think that conversation between Marcelo and Baibu is so significant too, because I think that they talk about, like, when did you know that dad wasn't coming back? And so I think throughout the film, like, we know that this family understands that he's not coming back, but that's not, like, even though that logistical truth is already realized for them, it's the fact that the government also doesn't care enough to give them the resolution or to try and help them process through this and acknowledge even what has been done. That is also part of the frustration and the emotion that comes from this experience too, of feeling like we were just one of many in the system that the system didn't seem to care enough about to help us move forward. And so I think that conversation between the two of them was really interesting and so specific that the film chose to give screen time to that exchange between the two of them.
And I love that that also reinforces that kids are smart and they pick up maybe on a lot more than we as adults give them credit for. And there's, you know, they all had intuition. They didn't know the full extent of what was going on, which was probably good, but they knew enough to know that something was wrong. And I appreciate that, because kids are smart, and I love it when movies acknowledge that truth, that they're smart, they're aware, they're intuitive. And obviously there's an age appropriate way to talk about difficult things with them, but it's also important to talk about difficult things with them because they usually know what's going on.
And it was neat to see the way that they had that understanding at different points in time too. And I think indicative of how we as, like, people have different ways of dealing with and processing things. Like, sometimes there's those of us that will hold on to hope for a little bit longer too, as a way to cope. And the feeling of facing something is harder. And so you have a sliver of hope that maybe there's more to this story than there actually is. And so even the differences in when they've chosen to come to terms with and lay that hope down to rest feels interesting for how like each of them are wired differently as well. And it was crazy too, because when they're having that conversation, obviously they're full grown adults and whatnot, but we have spent so much time with that family in that period of time that like I was remembering how little they were. Like Marcelo was just like a young boy, like running around with his dog, and Baibu was only a few years old then, and how youthful they were, and yet the emotional depth of what was happening was something that they were facing. And the film doesn't give us like plenty of moments to see the two of them specifically process through a lot of this. That there's like they're just in there intercut throughout, like we mentioned earlier. But thinking back to like how young they were and how significant this was in shaping their worlds through those formative years was fascinating, seeing them during that conversation have that conversation as adults.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And there are so many kids in this film. There's, I think, 5? There might be more. I don't know. And we get enough time with each of them that we can kind of get a feel for who they are without it feeling, like, overwhelming or distracting or too long or meandering. Like, this film is paced really, really well, and all of those moments with the kids, I feel like are so intentionally chosen so that they all get a good amount of screen time without detracting or distracting from, the from Eunice and what she's going through. They help emphasize and add to our empathy with her and her plight, and they still have distinct personalities and distinct things that they are going through. Like, that doesn't feel like an easy task to have pulled off, and yet this film has managed that really, really beautifully.
And I love seeing how much their personalities and countenances are still so prominent when they're older, too. There's something really sweet about seeing their whole family at the very ending of the film, like still very much a colorful host of personalities, and the atmosphere and their connection and their chemistry and trust together feel resonant of the opening of the movie when they were with their father, and they still all would like laugh together and joke and chat and lively, and there was such a feeling of connection amongst this family. And it was neat to see that while so much looks so different and they're older and they're grown and they have their own grandkids now, that feeling of family is still there, and a testament, like you mentioned earlier, to how much all of Eunice's sacrifices along the way were worth it and that this family is still very much intact, and that even though they walked through this incredible hardship, that the love and care that they all have for each other deepened and became more solidified than ever, because that feeling of family is still so prominent and very much still alive. And so the legacy of the father is still here through them being together and still laughing and having life lived out together. And so I thought that while this movie is obviously showcasing so much tragedy and so much heartbreak, that the showing of the family and them gathering together to take that photo again at the end is that little bit of resilience and hope and joy that is still could not be stamped out by everything that they went through.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think this is a great example, the fact that joy is a form of resistance as well. You know, in in the midst of all of that, they were still able to find moments of joy, and they were still able to find each other, and finding that connection with one another is so important and so valuable as they're just walking through hell. And so that part was really, really heartwarming to see that they still are themselves. Like, they were able to retain, you know, they were able to retain themselves through all of this. So much was taken away from them, and they were still able to come out of this and build something together.
Yeah, exactly. And the unity that is felt in that family photo and that dynamic is so neat. And I also just loved the little moments in that scene where the siblings are caring for their mother together, and they're following up, they're asking like how has she been lately, and you feel how much they are a team taking care of mom together. There isn't a feeling of like bitterness or competitiveness or anything like that. Like they just genuinely are trying to see how they can help carry the load and share the load together of caring for mom and making sure her needs are met. And so I just love seeing the way that like they're loving each other, but they are also together as a team loving their mom together, and getting to see those little moments where they would just check in and follow up and see how she's doing and what she's needed lately. And there's such evidence that they're all very much in communication with each other. And, like when one of them would mention, like, oh, like she's doing better than last week, the other knows what last week looked like. They're not estranged from each other. There's this feeling of like this moment that we're seeing is just one of many, but they have connected and stayed very much in each other's lives and up to date leading up to this point. And the feeling and evidence of that was so palpable too.
And it's a really sweet and heartwarming moment, but it's not like too sweet. I feel like I've said this so many times over the past few episodes, but I like that it's clear that Eunice is sick and her mind is going, and she's not all there. And that is a sad and heartbreaking thing to see, and that's hard to watch somebody go through that. And so I love that it's not like she's this like really vibrant with it grandma playing with all of her grandkids. Like I feel like if it was too happy of an ending, then that probably would have like tainted the entire film. But there is that piece of like you get old and that's just the reality of things, and we see how difficult that is, and how hard it can be to like care for an ailing parent, and that's just the reality of life. And there's this really sweet, heartwarming piece that she was just vital to building. So I love that it's kind of this mixed ending, seeing this woman that we spent so much time with, who is so vibrant and strong and all of the things that we already talked about, seeing her kind of like waste away, and at the same time seeing the incredible family that she helped build. And I think that mix really helps make the film not feel like too overly sweet at the end.
Yeah, no, that's so true. She's not like laughing with the grandkids and chasing them around and smiling and whatnot. No, like she's walked through like what 10 years of Alzheimer's too, and like the realities of aging is very prominent and real, and also just the years of her life that she's given over to advocacy, and the toll that that takes on your body and your mind when you've poured out so much and given so much like physically and mentally to something. Like you're right, like the ending is a perfect balance, and it feels like a passing of the torch to the next generation that will steward this family too. Like the vibrancy of the children all grown up now and responsible and in good places and connected together feels like, man, this is Ruben's legacy. This is Eunice's legacy, is their family and them thriving into this next generation as they pass on, and they've left something really beautiful behind. But you're right, the awareness of like this, nothing lasts forever, and every joyful moment will get passed on to the next generation to steward and carry the torch is very much a part of this ending. So you're right, it's not sickly sweet at all. Very much a healthy dose of reality.
Yep. With some hope, which is nice. Little
Yeah,
heartwarming
yeah.
moment for us.
A lot of hope. Yeah. All right. Any other last big things that we want to mention from I'm Still Here that are significant?
Something that I kept thinking about, especially in the kind of the middle section while she's trying to just have the money to live and care for her families is that I don't know what it was like in Brazil, but women in the US weren't allowed to open a bank account until 1974, which is crazy to think about because that wasn't that long ago. And so that's just what I kept thinking about every time she went into the bank. I was just thinking about how women here in the US in that same time period also they couldn't open their own bank accounts and were financially tied to the men in their lives. And we obviously have a very long way to go, but there are little glimpses like that where I'm like, man, like that wasn't that long ago, and we have made some progress in women's rights just around the world. And I think that that is a really important thing to remember, how far we've come in a short period of time as we look to like how much further we still have to go.
It's so wild. That was not that long ago at all. Just hearing that stat is like kind of mind blowing. But yeah, you're right. I think also speaks to the way that this film traverses so many decades and the transformation of the way that the world has changed so much over those decades, but also like, man, how archaic that was at the just not too long ago. It's unfathomable to me. It's that kind of wild.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very recent in the past,
Right?
which is crazy.
Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
man.
So
But
wild.
we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go.
Yep.
Much like Eunice and her journey for justice. It took a
Yep.
long time,
Still
but,
political.
yeah.
Yep. One little thing that I wanted to shout out that I think is such an interesting through line in this film that comes to life is just the power of photographs and the capturing of memories. And there's so much time spent showing on screen that box of photographs of their family's past, and the choice to end the film with a family photo feels so significant as well. And there's something there that feels really meaningful around the way that capturing memories, capturing the good moments, capturing the things that are significant milestones is important for us to remember and to not forget the presence of the people in our lives and the moments that really shaped us. And as someone that is like really vigilant about capturing photos and video of like my family and moments and having to do all of the labor and hours of time of like cleaning up the photos and like backing them up and putting them into Dropbox. Like this film did such a great job of showcasing like the significance of that and how they got to sit around the table. Eunice and Marcella and Baibu got to sit around the table and like look at that photo of the beach again and remember how good it was and remember the sweetness of their past and the memories and that moment being brought back to life for them because of the photo. And even the realities of like them being like, wait, so what were we there for again? Like in how memories can fade over time, but the power of photographs being able to remind us of, man, like we had so many beautiful moments, and to remember and cherish those, adding to and making it bearable to walk through some of the hardest moments is to remember back to the good, being kind of just a theme in this film. And the way that like family gathering at the end and them capturing that photo, like what will that photo mean to the next generation, for the little boy, the grandson that will look back on the photo and remember his grandmother, who he might not have full memories of, but knowing her presence was there being significant. So I just thought that the power and significance of capturing photos and physical photographs being passed down and cherished and remembered as keepsakes was just an interesting like theme in this film that felt significant and intentionally designed.
Mhm. Yeah, and as a person who comes from a non-picture taking family, I was like, "Oh, this is really cool." I'm always amazed when my friends are, like, really intentional to, like, take pictures of moments and things. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that is a thing that can be done. This is a good idea." And this film just absolutely reinforces the importance of that and remembering those things. Because again, like, the history wasn't that long ago, and history impacts the present, and which then impacts the future. And so retaining those things is important, and keeping a memory of those things is important. Yeah. And if it's through a photograph or a home video or a scrapbook,
Mhm.
whatever it is, it's still important to remember those things.
Yeah, yeah. Even her keeping the newspaper clippings and the time the film spends, like,
Yeah.
watching her flip through them and us getting to see those headlines and the way that the power of, like, his photo in the newspaper clipping, like, humanizes the reality of the circumstances and what that means is just it's so significant. It's so different from just, like, a black and white, text-based headline. No, like, this is a man with a family, and there's a whole life lived here and a human being that has disappeared, and we must not forget. Like, we should care, and we should press and investigate and advocate for the rights of these people being fully told and their stories being fully told. So just the way that that's all strung together and it's all in the same box together feels so important and significant.
That she constantly feels the need to organize. Like, I love that that's also part of the through line is, like, the box is always there because she's meaning to organize it. She knows that it's important, and yet it's just this constant, I need to organize this. I need to make sure that everything's together because I don't wanna lose any of this. And so again, just emphasizing the importance of this box and these photos for her and the power, I guess, that they have.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, this box being like the remnants of what she has of him and the way that that represents him and his story, like these physical representations of this person that she loved that lives in her mind, but this is like the physical, like, expression of it and thing that she can cherish physically in the physical realm because the human being isn't there other than just what's in her mind is it's all it's also woven in there together. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
So
good.
take the pictures. Take the
Yes.
family picture. Get out your, I mean, we don't have, like, camcorders anymore, but take out your phone, record a cute little video. Like,
Yeah.
bring back home videos.
Yes.
That's the lesson from I'm Still Here. Bring back home videos.
Right? Yeah. You're right. At the end, her watching the home videos again of them at the beach and the kids running around with the camera. Like, it's all so significant. And yeah. I mean, it's a lot of work, I will say, to, like, manage all of your storage space because we live in a digital age, which is just so annoying. Back it up in Google Photos, Google Cloud, iCloud, Dropbox, whatever you need, but just dump them in there. I mean, having to organize them is a lot of work, but yeah, take the photos and then, yeah, it's significant. It's important. It's all of our family's legacies and cherished memories, all that goodness that makes life life, you know?
Mhm.
All right. Well, this was our review and discussion of I'm Still Here. You can find it available out in theaters. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. So everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about I'm Still Here. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at MoviesandUsPod, or email us at moviesandUsPod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss the film September 5. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again with y'all very soon.